Hello and welcome to The Society with Barrister Fatma Shaheen at PTB World. Nelson Mandela once said that education is the most powerful weapon used to change the world. Now, if we look at Pakistan's constitution, more particularly Article 25A of the Pakistani constitution, it very categorically states that the state has a responsibility to ensure that every child aged 5 to 16 years of age gets not only a free but also a compulsory education in a manner as may be determined by the law itself. Having said that, we need to discuss and debate upon the fact that this constitutional article aside, to what level, to what extent do we actually see the implementation of the same? What are those societal barriers? What are those societal attitudes which actually hinder us from implementing this article in its true letter and spirit? This is exactly what we'll be talking about in our today's show. We'll be delving upon the fact that when we talk about education, how important is education in the development of any society, and in this regard particularly, we'll also be touching upon girls' education. We'll be talking about the various challenges which exist with regards to girls' education, be it within the school system, be it outside the school system, and we'll also be talking about the way forward, that what are the issues there and what is the way forward. How can we all as a responsible society work to address the same? This and much more to follow on today's show, and to do that, let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Miss Bela Raza Jameel Saiba, who is a public policy specialist alongside being the CEO of Idara Taleemo Agahi. Assalamu alaikum, madam, and welcome to the show. My second panelist for the show today is Miss Fiona Robertson, who is the Senior Academic Manager at British Council Lahore. Assalamu alaikum, madam, and welcome to the show. My third panelist for the show today is Miss Saima Anwar, who is a Senior Education Advisor at British High Commission. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Madam Bela, I would like to start the show with you. When we talk about education, I think the first thing that comes to anybody's mind is the fact that, education in the formal sense, education which you get by going to an institution, by sitting in a classroom. But we all understand that, of course, that is just not the meaning of education. So, from, of course, the viewpoint of a very senior educationist, how do you define education and what should it ideally entail?
You see, education is something that enables you to live life with total relevance, meaningfully, and also that gives you a sense of well-being and capabilities. Now, to be able to reach that level, it has obviously got to be beyond bookish knowledge or just passing a test. I know that passing a test in our society, because everything is very high stakes, means end all and be all. But we know that it means also that you need to have life skills, you need to have the ability to apply your knowledge, you need to have the confidence to be able to communicate and to live collaboratively with others and to adjust and adapt to many changing circumstances. This is what our life is about in many societies, including Pakistan.
Exactly. And madam, these are all the skills which you rightly so mentioned are the things that you don't typically get from a mainstream curriculum at the end of the day. You have to get that informal education otherwise.
Yes, and also because for in our formal spaces we tend to downplay the importance of our heritage, of our context, or what happens in our homes. Generally our homes and schools get very divided, which I was very happy to see that during COVID, because suddenly all our learning was pushed into our homes with intermittent schools opening and closings. Then I think the value of learning at home became certainly far more highly highlighted than it ever has been in a formal sense. And we tend to forget that context of the home, the heritage, the environment, the way you have been brought up, your context means a lot.
Right, madam, your point is noted, on which I would want you to comment further. But before that, we need to go over some statistics of this report. This report in front of me, it suggests that, Punjab has the highest number of out-of-school children, of which, there are 13 million children in all. Particularly 6.8 million are girls aged 6 to 16 years, which essentially means that 19% of girls are out of school at the primary level, whereas 59% girls are out of school at middle and higher secondary levels. How do you explain these figures?
Well, we've done quite a lot of research on girls' education because British Council is actually committed to that, and particularly post-pandemic. it's really quite shocking that schools are not places where it's not conducive for girls to go. I mean, they're worried firstly about travelling to school, where they sometimes get harassed, it's dangerous, their parents don't feel they want to go to school. But then the school itself is, you know, they don't have adequate toilets, drinking water. All these things are hindrances. And then, of course, there's the problem that in some families, the families themselves don't believe that the girls need education as much as boys.
Right. And I think of all these social factors that you have listed, Madam, I think you would want to add something to this. We have that system as well, that lack of system, you know, enabling system which actually enables girls to go to school, or even those who have actually dropped out to go back to school per se. And then economics again, they also play a very important role.
You know, parents generally speaking are not very much aware of that there could be some second chance programs. You know, the options are just beginning to emerge. Our biggest problem is not having sufficient number of schools at post-primary levels, which is both middle and secondary schools.
Right, Madam.
So that's why we were coming to fill that particular gap.
Right. Madam, your point is noted. On which, Ms. Saima, you know, I would want you to comment. But, you know, when we talk about this issue, the barriers being there, especially for girls who do want to go back to school, and then there's this category who are actually out of school, and regardless of the fact that they want to go back, they are not facilitated that way. So I think there are different pools and different categories of girls at the end of the day. But, you know, if you look at this issue in a more broad, all-encompassing manner, it is a socio-economic issue, so to speak.
There are also, like you're saying, financial barriers to accessing school, and for that stipends that are very important, especially for girls to attend secondary school. One other thing that we found very important, especially in the case of girls, is that the distance to school often becomes a barrier for girls to go to school. So having either bringing the school closer to the home or to providing transport for girls. So this is this sort of intervention has really helped increase enrollment of girls.
Overall improving the infrastructure, so to speak, and then of course making the system more accessible to, in terms of maybe bringing down the cost of education.
Exactly.
But at the same time ensuring that this doesn't in turn adversely affect the quality of education that is being imparted. On which, Madam, I would want you to comment. I think you've mentioned a very interesting program that you are running. So it has different facets to it. Tell us about the different facets, because it is catering to not only one facet, which is life skill based education, it is catering to so many other things too.
Absolutely. So when we took the age group of 9 to 19, the adolescent age group, we realized that we have to cater to several interventions depending upon what the age group of the child is, or whether the girl child was never enrolled or just dropped out of school. So we have 4 interventions.
Right.
One is an accelerated quick learning program, so they can do basic literacy and numeracy and polish up those skills, because without those foundational skills, nothing really builds up.
Right.
The second is, if the girl had dropped out at say primary level or at middle level or at even secondary level in grades 9 and 10, we do their baseline assessment and then try and give them a second chance opportunity to complete that level of schooling, so they can become a primary, middle or secondary graduate. The third intervention, which is for all girls regardless, is that of the 9 life skills that we have. The life skills are from awareness to confidence building to self-defense to financial inclusion to addressing issues of how to work with as civil society actors. Now those 9 life skills are not just modules, but they've been made into animated films in 5 languages, which are available to everyone. And finally, the 4th one, which is very important for girls who are 14 years plus, is that of technical vocational, so that livelihoods can be also addressed, because girls at that age are interested in not just education but also skills or technical vocational skills which will give them livelihood. That we must make it all inclusive, and we must also bring in digital literacy. Digital literacy is now as much a part of life skill as it is now considered as an essential entitlement and capability for every child all over the world, and including countries like Pakistan.
Of course. To which I think, Fiona, you would also want to add something, because your programs, both your EDGE program as well as your teacher development program, is very focused on the issues that she has raised, more particularly teaching teachers as well as students about the importance of digitalization, and how important it is now considering that we are still living through the pandemic?
Absolutely. So, I mean, let's talk about EDGE first, because in fact,
Right.
ITA is our delivery partner, so we're working together on that. And EDGE, which is English and Digital for Girls Education, it's clubs where adolescent girls meet together and work through English skills, digital skills, and life skills.
Right.
And I think it's also helped the community and parents look long term that if their daughters have these skills like English and digital, long term they're able to contribute to the family income because they're able to get jobs, and you know, maybe that would make them reflect that it might be important to invest something a bit more in children's education.
Right. So it basically gets it going. You're giving that the basic level of education, which will of course help them build on their careers further. But one very important question which arises in this regard is, I think, something which would be of maybe interest to the audience as well, is that when we talk about these clubs through which British Council is working to impart education in girls, how do you differentiate this concept from that of a traditional school?
So it's very different and very exciting because there's no teacher. So the adolescent girls aged between 13 and 19 run the clubs themselves. We identify peer group leaders who are girls of the same age. Some of them are 13, 14, and they facilitate the club.
Right.
So they're not a teacher, but they're sitting with their friends, they're guiding them because they are girls that we know have slightly better English skills, digital skills, and this ability to lead. But it creates a safe space. The girls actually report how much they enjoy being in the clubs rather than the school.
And Fatma, it's like a revolution, especially in the southern districts of Punjab where we are operating. These are far, away, remote communities in the rural areas. And it's so impressive to see that if you give an enabling environment for the girls, these
Right.
adolescent girls, they can just do wonders.
A very important thing which we must also talk about in this regard is the fact that what has been the scope and outreach of this program, because from what I understand, you started a few years ago.
We've been doing the project in the British Council for about 4 or 5 years globally.
Right.
But in Pakistan, we only started in 2021. We've reached about 1,500 girls so far and set up 90 clubs in South Punjab. So in a way, the impact's quite small, but the impact it's had on the community who are seeing the changes in their girls. I mean, I just wanted to give an example about girls who've been, working on digital skills for 2 or 3 weeks, and
Right.
then they go back home and they show their parents, look, I can book that bus ticket online.
Right, madam, your point is noted. On which, madam, I think we must talk about, when we talk about teacher development, we must consider this just not in the facet of, giving teachers being obligated to give children that conducive and, that friendly environment in which they should be taught. I think the responsibility also lies on the school or the institutions, administration, the staff, and, for that matter, other children too. So in this regard, considering that you have worked in so many different positions yourself, what kind of policies do we need to have in place such that maybe children not only feel very comfortable voicing their opinions, but also, it's a two-way kind of a communication, because a lot of times we see that even teachers, they tend to bully the students.
We talk a lot about teachers because, in the classroom, as you can understand, the teacher is the most important and makes all the difference, in a child's learning. But you're right, it's really important to engage with the wider school system, including the school leadership and management. And we've learned from our experience that, anything that the teachers can do depends really on, how the management responds and what sort of a conducive environment they can provide to the teacher.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that, it's also very important to engage with the parents. And unfortunately, in our system, this is a very untapped resource. And in some of the very high performing education systems, they've come up with very creative ways to bring parents into the school, either
Right.
through parent teacher associations or parents coming to volunteer in schools. As Ms. Vela said, that during COVID, we saw that every single parent, took an interest in their child's education, whether they were educated or not. I think it's sometimes, it's probably sometimes the parents, but also perhaps sometimes the schools that discourage parents from coming to school because, you know, they sometimes this perception that there is some accountability involved. Then the other thing that's, I think, very important is how do you make schools safe and inclusive?
Right.
You know, by that I mean, you know, where a place where children feel protected, where they feel free from discrimination.
I think in this regard, these are exactly the issues that I was talking about: discrimination, violence, bullying, harassment. I think all of these issues, they need to be addressed at a policy level. And if we talk about, you know, ensuring that we have that optimum level of parent-teacher involvement, I think then again we need to have proper policies in place which are actually enforced. On which, madam, I'll come to you. When we talk about life skill-based education, you know, how easy or how difficult is it for parents to accept that, you know, now times have changed and now the contours of education has changed? So how willing are they to accept that their children, when they go to schools or otherwise for that matter, they will be learning all these very important skills?
Once parents are convinced that the program is conducive, that we have an enabling environment, that whatever opportunities we are providing, parents are equally accessible to come and see what we are doing, that in fact it is happening for the betterment of their girls with a lot of dignity and a lot of respect to the girls and the parents. The parents are one of our most amazing partners. They have not only accepted the entire set of interventions, but even what we thought would be a culture of silence, that it was very invisible to speak about life skills, you know, in the home, that in fact they have become very proud of the fact that the girls are now being able to talk about subjects and topics that was generally not considered to be something that you could speak about at home or in the society.
Right.
Even the girls, because we worked with Sharmeen Obaid Chanoy for the filmmaking, just like we worked with British Council for Edge and English and Digital. Sharmeen insisted that we should, and we also felt that it was important for the girls not just to see films, but to be, and talk about them, but to be able to make films on their own issues, and they did. So can you imagine the same families who had, for whatever reasons, because the environment didn't seem conducive, were so now willing to see that progress in their girls' lives, because they understood that transformation is not about transformation of the girls' lives, but that transformation touches their lives as well,
of course,
and that of other generations. So that's why investing in girls' education means that you're actually investing in multipliers in society, because we feel that Pakistan needs programs like this,
and I think
which are so easily doable in government schools, in private schools, in community schools. So we shared that possibility with the government, with society, with parents, that you can do these programs very successfully and very fast.
Right, madam, your point is noted. On which, Ms. Saima, I would want you to deliberate further that when we talk about, you know, giving girls those vocational skills, especially those skills which equip them for the market, how do you feel can market, you know, facilitate them, inquiring them the same? Because it is, of course, a two-way communication. We understand girls get that skill and then they also get that opportunity to show those skills.
So I think, a couple of things that we need to keep in mind when designing and delivering technical vocational programs. One of which you've said, identifying the right skills, but for that you also need to scope what job opportunities or entrepreneurship opportunities are available in the environment in which they're living, and connect those skills to that. In this regard, I wanted to mention a very innovative program. So what they're doing is that they're partnering with the private sector providers, because one of the other challenges is the quality of the skill development programs.
Right.
And there might be specialized institutions that are well equipped to provide that kind of technical vocational education. And then, like you said, linking them to the market or entrepreneurship, or even incubating, if they want to become entrepreneurs and start their own businesses. We've also seen that quite a lot in Pakistan,
Right. More so, I think, in COVID, because everybody who has lost their job, they want to do something, or even vice versa. I think there's been this influx of young women entrepreneurs coming up, which is, of course, very positive at the end of the day.
And we've seen that across all segments of society.
Right. But when we talk about, supporting them, how precisely do you think can we do that? Because this is something again which should stem ideally from the system as well. This is something which you, like very rightly so mentioned, is something which just shouldn't be limited to public-private partnerships. I think we need to have an overall infrastructure system. We need to have policies. We need to have so many other things which actually help you sustain this entrepreneurship.
So, of course, one of the first things is finances, arranging that. And if you want to start a business, or, if you want to go into a certain employment, obviously, what do you call it? Apprenticeships, you
Right.
know. And I think a good vocational program will always look at those kinds of things. And particularly for girls, we're limited in terms of the choices, in terms of the sectors in which they can go. But I still feel that there are lots of other, very coming out of those traditional trades and things
The
in
routine,
which-
I think, beauticians,
Exactly.
the routine
But,
girls who are actually,
we have a very
stitching
good
stuff.
example of girls learning to use technology
Right.
to generate some income, and things of that sort,
Right.
which can be done within our cultural milieu. So,
Right. I would want you to comment on this further, because I understand that this is something that you've also worked upon in your own capacity at British Council. But before we come on to that, we must also talk about teachers' development in the larger perspective. That how important is teachers' development when it comes to giving the students the right, the conducive, a more viable kind of an atmosphere where they can learn more and in an effective manner. So tell us about the teacher development programs that you have been working on, and what has been the scope, the outreach, and how effectively in practice do you monitor the same?
So we were working in Punjab from 2017 to 2020 on a large-scale project for primary teachers called Peely. That ended. We've now started a new project. We've just started implementing this new project, East, which is about
Right.
improving English teachers in primary level.
Right.
Now, our projects are a large scale, so we are trying to reach, in this case, all the English language primary teachers in Punjab. So there's about 100,000. So what we're trying to do, change the sort of atmosphere in the classroom, engage students, give them some sort of voice so that they're able to take ownership for their learning,
Right.
that they're participating more fully.
Right.
In a way, the teacher is taking a bit of a back seat. They don't need to be standing
So
up.
basically, you're kind of encouraging a more of an interactive kind of a
Absolutely.
participatory approach in a classroom.
Absolutely.
But my question then remains, madam, the thing is that then what work are you doing on teachers? From what I have gathered, from what you have said, you're working on the students. But what skills are you inculcating in the teachers so as to help them make the environment more friendly?
Absolutely, because we're working with the teachers. We're not working with the students.
Right.
There are too many students to do. So that we're at the moment doing a really exciting piece of work, because we're embedding our project in their existing system. They've got a new digital platform. The teachers are already enrolled in that. So we're able to use that for the input.
Okay.
It's ongoing school-based professional development, which means that it's happening in school time.
Right. Okay.
So teachers are trying out new methodology in class. They're being monitored on that, monitored, mentored. Their lessons are being evaluated.
Right.
And we're also looking at the reaction of the students to this new methodology.
Right.
So this means that the teachers are not getting pulled out of class. They're
Right.
not wasting any lesson time.
And are you precisely working to improve their, actual participation in class, like in terms of the attitudes that they might have towards girls as opposed to boys, or for that matter,
Absolutely.
the way they deal or they tackle with them? Because a lot of times, I think this is a very persistent issue on which madam would also want to comment. That we have this issue of corporal punishment in the country, where we have seen instances where teachers have not behaved so nicely with the students. So are these the issues that you're also working
So
on?
yes, I mean, even teachers remembering students' names, smiling at them, asking them how they are. Okay, I'll give an example. Usually teachers go in and say, "Hello, everybody. How are you?" And the class will chant, "Oh, we're all fine," or something.
Right.
It's completely meaningless.
Right, of
if
course.
the teacher remembers, so hello Fatima, how are you today? You weren't at school last week, what happened? Or I remember
So it's very pleasant to hear, Fiona, then that you're also working on the etiquette part of it, which is, of course, madam, you would agree with me on this. This is a very important part of
Absolutely.
it. A lot of times we usually ignore it and we just consider it in a very mechanical way, which of course is not wrong, because they are doing all the right things, giving them that basic level of education, training them, imparting them with the necessary skills. But then this is something which is equally important too. But when we talk about COVID-19, madam, how do you see Pakistan's education system being affected by the pandemic itself? Because then again we have very divided opinion on this.
No, Fatma, so since Idara Talim Agahi has been invested in evidence-based, citizen-led accountability on learning, the ASER report, the Annual Status of Education report, which has just come out, covering 152 rural districts of Pakistan, there's some very exciting trends. Of course, the sad part is, like all over the world, Pakistan is no exception. We've seen some enrollment losses and we've also seen learning losses, but not as much as we thought we would.
Right.
We have seen massive learning losses in grade 3, but we've seen also that learning losses could have been far worse in grade 5 and 8. But why have those learning losses not taken place as much? The very big reason, which is now a positive part,
Right.
which we never used to capture earlier because we had a whole section on COVID impact in schools. We saw, when we asked children, how was your learning supported? So they said almost 68% of the children said their biggest support came from the family members.
Right.
Then they said their support came from television, teleschool, etc.
PTV also started
PTV,
teleschool, I remember.
absolutely. And that has been a very big, by the way, factor in the way learning was transacted in homes. There was digital inputs as well. They spoke about WhatsApps and smartphones. Now, this is a huge sea change in Pakistan.
Right.
As I mentioned earlier, the homes are not passive and silent spectators
Right,
to the
madam.
learning processes. So just the system has to take into account that there's a lot of activity happening at home. But also we saw, it's important to recognize that,
Right.
that for the first time in Pakistan, we saw 30% outreach of teachers and schools to
Right.
homes. They actually gave them learning packs, they talked to them, they actually also communicated on WhatsApp. Now, in our entire system and our history, we have seen a divide between school and home.
Right.
This kind of a lot of activity inside the home, a lot of respect for education, which also by the way means a higher rate of tuition,
Right.
coaching, which means more burden on the household.
Right.
That's a big problem.
I think,
But we are
madam-
seeing for the first time an engagement of teachers and schools reaching out to children at home because of the fear of this. And I must give credit to the system for that. But the question we are asking is, can we have these building blocks become part of the mainstream education system? Whilst we are applauding the fact that a lot of digital players have become active for the first time in Pakistan's history at scale, and also in low-cost private schools as well as government schools, it's great.
Right.
But we know the digital divide exists even in the school, in the
Right.
homes. So example, if a father has or a brother has a smartphone, by the time it comes to the sister or the daughter or mother or wife, it can be at 11 o'clock at night.
Right.
And that's why we saw 24/7 people being active on learning. So the digital divide is real, and that's why when we are coming up with hybrid systems and thinking about bringing distance learning, etc., we must think about low tech and high touch.
Right.
So even if you can bring through WhatsApp, your YouTubes or SMS, and SMSs have also been very
Of
active
course.
during this period.
And I think not
you
only
have
in
or
the form-
television,
of course, television
or
too.
radio.
So many other things.
So you need to think about a mix which will cut across this digital divide. Meanwhile, I think my insistence is, just like I've been saying forever, that
Right.
it's time for us to implement 25A seriously.
Right.
It is very important for the government to invest in the digital enabling environment.
Right, madam, your point is noted. On which, Ms. Saima, I would want you to deliberate that when we talk about giving, special children this right to education, now the debate is divided, because as you must be knowing yourself that world over we have those league of countries where children are given this right in mainstream schools with, able-bodied children. But then there are also countries world over which actually say that, we need to have special schools for special children. For us as a society, what do you think is the most viable option?
So like you said yourself, there is no one right answer or approach to this, and it all depends on the context in which you're working. So in Pakistan, what we've tried to sort of work with is, working with the context. There are special schools for children with moderate to severe disabilities, where they get more focused attention and time. And then for children with mild disabilities, we feel that the best thing is to try and mainstream them into into regular schools, and then provide the additional resource to those schools to
I think it would be something that should vary from case to case depending on, of course, the nature of somebody's disability. And I think in this regard we must also talk about those children who are actually mentally not well, because usually we see that we just talk about those children who have physical disabilities, but what about those who have disabilities which we can't particularly see? On which, madam, you wanted to add something?
So they are the intellectual functionings which have been added to the expanded definition of disabilities, we are less familiar with. And Fatma, do you know that almost 70% of our children with mild to even moderate disabilities are already mainstreamed in the schools, mostly sitting in government schools, but our teachers are not prepared to deal with those disabilities, and our physical environments are also not conducive.
They don't have access to assistive technologies.
So issue is that the assistive or adaptive technologies are not there. We could actually think of having one resource person in a cluster of schools, because we don't have all the resources, but the children are already there, and actually do you know that their learning is not very much far off from those children who do not have disabilities. Now this is all part of the ASER survey results which keeps coming out, and we are already seeing that in 1 in 5 schools there are children sitting with disabilities, but we are not aware what to do with them.
I think the stress again goes back, madam, to having that complete infrastructure, that system, that environment. I think in this regard, you would also want to contribute to the conversation, in the sense that, when we talk about homeschooling, homeschooling is something which is generally not that socially acceptable in our society. Although, despite the fact that, post COVID-19 or living through this pandemic, we are pushed in that direction. So when we talk about homeschooling, how do you compare, Pakistani culture in this regard to what it is in most Western jurisdictions, like countries like UK, US, Australia, New Zealand, and so many other countries where this culture is very prevalent?
Yes, and more people in the UK, for example, and in Europe are doing homeschooling. And it's strange, because I would have thought Pakistan was actually the ideal place for homeschooling because of the large family units, the fact that many girls would be more comfortable staying at home or near their home, as the Edge Clubs shows. And also, if there are children with special needs in the house, they can participate with their siblings comfortably, with the love of their family members. They don't have to have the stress of going into a large classroom where they might not be aware of what's going on. So I think it would be really, really interesting to explore the possibilities.
I think it would make education more affordable for those who otherwise might not be able to afford it. But I think in this regard, we need to have a proper system in place which actually facilitates the same too. And by system, I mean an ecosystem to that way, because I think this is something on which we all agreed upon generally, that this is something, not giving girls that right to education is something which also stems from poverty at the end of the day. On which note, madam, concluding today's conversation, what is that message that you would want to give to all the people out there, especially those who are watching this show, that when we talk about education actually contributing towards the development of a society, more so girls' education, what contribution can it particularly make, not only for us, as individuals, but also towards our households, rather the whole country?
Fatma, I'll start with 2 comments. The second one will shock you a little bit, but the first one is what we know. We have only 25% of our workforce in the labor force which comprises of women. Now that's unacceptable. Pakistan cannot progress till its girls and women are productive.
Right.
And that has to happen. So there's no two ways about it. But do you know, in the rural survey that we've just conducted, finished in December 2021, and the results are just out, in two provinces and one area, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in Punjab, and Islamabad Capital Territory, there are more boys out of school than girls during the COVID period. The question is, has that happened because more boys of age 11 plus have been withdrawn from school so that they can go into child labor to make amends for the economic losses of those households? We have a big task ahead,
Right.
not just for girls,
For
now
boys too.
also for boys. Pakistan has to wake up to this call, and this is not just in rural areas, it is also in urban slums, which are expanding because we have the highest urbanization rate in South Asia. So it's a wake up call
Right, of
for
course.
education, for economics and productivity if Pakistan wants to march ahead. And we need to quickly make amends and fill up the gaps or the slips that we have suffered during COVID.
Right.
We have to look at data, and we have to take fast actions.
Right. And I think we need to have data is something that we generally missed upon earlier during the conversation, that we need to actually focus on our statistics to data collection.
And by the way, Pakistan has started collecting much better data, but we're not using our evidence to take actions.
Right.
And those actions cannot be delayed. We are all there, and I think Pakistan has got one of the best records on partnerships with the government. So what are we waiting for?
Right, madam, your point is noted. On which, Fiona, I would want to come to you, and coming towards the conclusion of the show, I think a very relevant question to ask you before we conclude today's show is the fact that, what role can social media, because we all understand that social media has a very important role to play, especially when it comes to educating people, more so women, who otherwise, might not have that access to a formal education system. So what are your views in this, and how do you feel can we use social media constructively in order to end, this vicious cycle of poverty?
So I think in one of the reports on the Kathiawadi, they found that girls had smartphones. Maybe they weren't going to school, but they all had their smartphones, which they're using. So we need to look at the instruments that we can use to developing girls' education. In that case, we can put things on WhatsApp,
Right.
Which is a very feasible way of getting lessons to kids. Things like Facebook Live, things like access to articles, resources, all kinds of things.
I think Twitter has a very important role to play this way, because Twitter is that one place where so many things trend this way. We've seen so many social, political movements find way. Remember that the two very important movements which come to me at the top of my head, Black Lives Matter and then Me Too movement.
Exactly.
These are such important, movements which actually found their way on Twitter. So I think these are the things that we need to use, but we need to use them in a more constructive manner.
Exactly. And, I think people are very afraid of social media because we think it's going to damage people or whatever. But there's such a positive side to it.
Right.
We're using it in the British Council with Facebook Live events for government teachers. We've reached thousands of teachers in remote areas, and they're participating on this social media platform.
Right.
And this is something we can replicate among students as well.
Right. And Ms. Saima, coming towards you, wrapping up today's conversation, what are the lessons do you feel can we as a Pakistani society learn from the education systems of different countries, considering that you yourself have worked in not one, rather different jurisdictions all over the world? So how can we, sitting in Pakistan, work to improve both the quality and the standard of education as it is being imparted to our students?
So I, won't go far. I'll talk about the region, and particularly Bangladesh, which is recognized globally as a success story in terms of the education of girls and women.
Right.
And has higher female literacy rates and higher participation of women in the workforce, which is very important,
Right.
very important issue. And of course, being a South Asian country, we see some of the same challenges working within the government that we see here in Pakistan. And in my estimation, I think the success story in Bangladesh, the reason is the contributions of the very large not-for-profit or non-state sector. And here, I would mention organizations such as BRAC that run very large networks of community-based schools, which have successfully been providing education to children in rural areas. And I think that's something that Pakistan can also kind of learn from. And here, I think one of the things that we need to think about is coming up with more flexible alternatives.
Right.
We started the conversation with this.
Perhaps developing the school of, the concept of homeschooling.
Exactly. So what do we do and here I would also like to again mention public-private partnerships.
Right.
Obviously we're doing quite a lot here in Pakistan as well, but there is much more scope.
I think we need to streamline our efforts more that way, basically. So everything turns out to be more productive that way. Your point is noted, on which note I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Madam Bela. Thank you so much, Ms. Fiona, and thank you so much, Ms. Saima, for being here with us today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about education, and we also spoke about the education system, more so the problems, the challenges that do exist in it. We cannot ignore the fact that women at the end of the day do comprise approximately more than half of the world's population, which of course makes them a very important, rather significant global resource, which is very important that we give them their right to education, which of course is their fundamental right at the end of the day. And in this regard, we must not forget the fact that as they very famously say, that when you educate a man, you only educate a man, but when you educate a woman, you not only educate that particular woman, but you also educate her family, more so the entire nation. On which note, thank you so much for watching The Society. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.